bombed the boats that we were in, just one after the other, and they show the smoldering rubble. And they put in the captions beneath it, Ukrainian special forces were going to use these boats to develop a bridgehead on the other side of the river. And by doing this, they had destroyed these Azov soldiers, and we had, saved Russia and stopped the counteroffensive, yada yada, they hear us.
The next day, while everyone was still rattled by the previous day's events, Dylan and Alex were visiting John in the hospital when Dylan was texted a video.
Me and Alex, by the way, went to the hospital to visit John. He was pretty messed up, but he was in safe condition. And when we were talking to him and about to head out from the hospital, I get a text message from my buddy, from my good friend in Kiev. And it's a video that was very obviously the boat that we were using the day before, the red boat. And there was the white boat next to it, and it was on the exact shoreline. It was us, that was us, the aid workers on the shoreline. And it was from the perspective of a Russian drone with a rune often used by the Nazis in the top left-hand corner. And they were playing rock music as they shelled us on video. And then they posted this online with a message about us being special forces trying to build a bridgehead on the other side of the river. It was absolutely ridiculous. It was surreal. It was kind of hard to process. It was probably the most shocking part of the entire trip.
The video in question was posted on the Disgusting 8 Telegram channel, the social media channel for drone and artillery support elements attached to the Unevacuatables Battalion, a private military company owned by Sergei Aksionov. Aksionov is the head of the Crimean Occupation Authority and was installed in 2014 after Russian forces invaded and occupied the Crimean Regional Parliament building. Aksionov's invaded battalion are officially designated as reservists and formalized as the 30th Combat Army Reserve. The group also cooperates with the Russian Army's 150th Motorized Rifle Division and 205th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade. Members of the Unevacuatables Battalion were made to sign a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense under the Combat Army Reserve program, and with PMC Convoy, a company consisting of reconnaissance and assault units led by Wagnerite Konstantin Piccolo.
What the fuck? Also, congratulations on your promotion to Ukrainian Special Forces.
Yeah, Ukrainian Azov Special Forces.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that you put in all the work for that. That's wild to hear.
Yeah. I'm surprised I could. I mean, I can only do how many pull-ups, and they let me in that?
I'm sorry, I shouldn't joke about it. That is insane. That is actually fucking crazy. Yep. But that goes to your point about spreading misinformation or disinformation. That's clear. That's just not what happened.
That's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
But since I knew everybody. I gathered the testimony. We filmed. Me and my friend Anthony Bartaway, we did the work to gather all of this, and with Offbeat Research, we were able to present. Here's the GoPro footage on the ground. Here's, you can see the sound of the whistle, where the direction the stuff's coming from.
Yeah.
Here's us placing the location. Here's evidence that I filmed before of them doing aid work in animal shelters, them loading it up with aid supplies, no military gear. We could connect the people, and we were able to bring on a international law analyst to talk, obviously why bombing aid workers is a war crime.
Yeah.
And so it was I would say probably is the best, most documented, thorough documentation of Russian shelling of aid workers during that flooding. There's other instances where aid workers got shelled, but it's from the perspective of the aid workers either filming themselves or you see the injuries afterwards. So we were able to help at least a little bit build the case against the people who committed those targeting of aid workers, the war crimes.
I'm glad you're okay. Shit. That's awful to hear. I mean, elements. To your point about being able to respond to the disinformation that was being spread, that is wonderful. That sounds like the perfect way to be able to respond to that. What are they going to say? They can't dispute you. The evidence that you're presenting, it sounds like it would be ironclad. They would basically have to go out and call you a liar. And based on if you have recordings and testimony from several other other people who were there, then there's really nothing that can be said about that. At least I can think of.
They just and there was people. I was looking at the Telegram posts who were posting all this information in the replies,
oh my.
Hey, look, you guys just bombed aid workers. Great job, morons. And they're just they just ignore it. They just ignore it, and they just kind of and that's the only way you can, because if you acknowledge that you lied, then that could shake the faith that your viewership have in you.
Yeah.
So the hope is that people just don't see the replies, people don't see the original, and I advertise to an English-speaking audience, so it would only be dependent upon people translating it into Ukrainian and Russian, a lot of this work, for them to be able to understand this. So a lot of times it's language divides that stop some of that information being spread around, because it would be good English language reporting, but it isn't translated.
Sure.
But Google Translate and stuff like that has been helping with that, help proliferating the information.
That is good. It's just, it's awful. I mean, I'm glad that you're okay. I'm glad that you are able to present that information and be able to talk about this to the world, but fuck. Yeah, you mentioned a little bit. We can talk about that more if you want to, but I also know that you talked a little bit about Dima, and I know that's a person that you did a lot of work with and that you've done a lot of work with over in Ukraine, and that you recently released a special about them.
Released a documentary called The Unevacuatables.
И вот так, сначала вот такая была эвакуация. Сколько привез топлива, столько вот колонии выводит. Вот так прямо с побитыми машинами, без стекол, без дверей. Люди вот так в очках, вот таких лыжных. Это было смешно.
10 едем на ободе. Дима не сдается. Опасная зона, приходится выезжать. Нема времени менять колесо. Очень опасно. Дима наперед.
Which, by the way, isn't a real word, but that also means I have monopoly on the advertising. So
yeah, there you
plus,
go.
unvacuable. Does that sound as fun? It doesn't sound as good. I think unevacuatables. I think has a better thing to it.
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Sure.
All right. Well,
sure.
You'll, in theory, you'll be you'll be writing the Google. If people search for you, you'll be in the first search results. So there you have that going for you.
He was he's an interesting guy. He's kind of, he's from Dnipro, and he's like a lot of people from Dnipro. He's a party guy. He liked to get in a lot of fights back in the day. He's trying to use faith to try to improve himself, but he's a Dnipro party guy, which a lot of people from Dnipro, people from Ukraine know what that means, but
sure.
he's an interesting fella. He's a fun guy.
Yeah.
And somebody would not imagine to be an aid worker or an evacuation worker given what's going on in the country. But when the war started, he ended up evacuating people from Mariupol, a lot of people from Mariupol, not just Mariupol, but from Svetohirsk and other locations around Bakhmut and at other of the big hotspots all across the country. That's documented. And when he saved my friend John Jones, helped save him, dragged him from the shoreline, we had interviewed him for the Kherson piece that we eventually released. And my friend who was translating it came to me and said, Dylan, this guy's crazy. You gotta interview this guy. You gotta do a piece about this guy. And then I started asking other people about him and learn more and more and more about him.
Sure.
And so then I decided I was going to embed with him, film what his experiences are like, take all of this original footage from his time in Mariupol and all these other locations, publish as much of it as we can, and try to talk about his story. Not only because he's kind of crazy and he's had a lot of crazy experiences, not only because he's evacuated a lot of people, but he is somebody who was raised in a Russian-speaking household. He was sent to Russian school even though the Ukrainian school was closer. His parents made sure he went to Russian-speaking school. His father fought in Afghanistan and Chechnya. This is somebody that was supposed to be like the prime candidate for like the Ruski Mir, like the Russian world coming in to like open their arms. And yet these are the people that are left picking up the pieces. Those who have felt the most pain and damage in this war are in areas that are largely Russian-speaking. It is in eastern Ukraine where the largest concentration of Russian speakers are, which is who the Russians said they were coming to liberate and free. And that's where the majority of the destruction, the majority of the death, the majority of civilian casualties, the majority of all the damage that this war has caused is. Which is an interesting dilemma for those who are talking about, uniting and helping the quote-unquote Russian peoples, the brotherly nations, for those who still believe that in Russia.
From what I understand, like a lot of one of the talking points I hear from the pro-Russia side is that like, oh, this is Russia going in and like reclaiming people who, want to be a part of Russia.
Yeah.
Right. And from what you're describing, it sounds like this would be like the primary candidate of a person who would be in favor of like reuniting with Russia. Mind you, like pursuant to what I said earlier, like I'm not one to make like a massive prescription based on anecdote, but like it is interesting that you have a person so strongly going against that tide to the point where they're even trying to help evacuate other people out of there.
And it's the thing that's interesting though is because of Dima's background, he can communicate to people who are in these communities in a way that I think others can't. And because he has that experience within like the cultural length of the cultural arms of the Russian world, he can communicate to people who have been living in these communities and try to talk to them for those who are actually waiting for the Russian army. Because those people do exist. I met them.
Okay.
They're largely elderly. They largely live like either in occupied territory or in frontline communities. They don't make up a majority of any of the villages or the cities I've gone to. What's happened is like 90 to 95% of the city is left, and the 5% that is left, 40 or 30% of that is going to be made up of people who are waiting for the Russian army to come. And the rest are maybe people who like have always lived in that village and have never wanted to leave because they can never imagine living anywhere else. Everything they own is in that village, and if they give it up, then they literally have lost everything. They've got the children in that village. They don't get enough pensions from the government, and so the idea of moving to Kiev, where it's going to be like $300, $400 a month for rent, if you're getting a decent, like a smaller apartment maybe, that's going to be difficult for somebody who's only getting like $150 a month from the government. So there's other problems, but for those who are actually there waiting, he can talk to them in a way, and he talks about constantly in this documentary that I'm not supposed to be biased. I'm supposed to be unbiased. My main goal is life. Life is more precious than gold. Life. And so we got to film him debating people who refuse to leave, fighting to try to get them out. And that's the pinnacle of the documentary, is him debating the waiters, the people who refuse to leave. And it's, I think, the most interesting part of the documentary.
Родненькая, что вы тут? Как у вас дела? Я спрашиваю. Когда уже на его платят?
Я не плачу. У меня сын отец.
Да?
Да, я сына не брошу.
Ну, давайте я вам визиточку дам. Вдруг что-то поменяется. Жилье и питание есть в Днепре. Бесплатно. На неограниченный срок. Вместе со всеми. С сыном. Понял? Все. Так что не переживайте.
Он боится, что его в армию возьмут, а он не подлежит армии, он
Нет, в армию никто не возьмет, все нормально. Сын пускай не переживает, мы его эвакуируем, на блокпостах не забирают в армию, все нормально, пускай просто не переживает. Мы его вывезем, потому что выезжать можно, поняли? Вот так и передайте, если что, звоните. Хорошо?
Хорошо.
Все. Я вам, знаете, что могу сказать? Вы хорошо выглядите. Для вот этих обстоятельств вы шикарно выглядите, родненькая наша.
Мне 70 лет, а я выгляжу на 75.
Кто вам сказал? Я думал, вам 52 где-то, а вы тут 70.
Смотрите, все, цветовая гамма по-доброму.
Ну, модница наша.
Конечно.
Все, звоните.
Да, да.
Главное, что все целы. Это самое главное, слава богу.